Welcome back to episode number 7 of the Heavy Duty Hub podcast, powered by Key Advisors, driving real dealership profit. I'm Jeremy.
And I'm Chris.
And today we're going to wrap up our discussion on the obsolescence for now. Of course, this is one of those things that continually has to be monitored. We continually have to go after and be proactive. So I'm sure we'll be talking about this again in future episodes, but this will wrap up the series we're doing now. And when we concluded our last discussion, and we're talking about OPSO and what OPSO is and how OPSO ends up on your shelf. So today we're going to wrap it up by talking about what we can do when we hit that point where we're stuck with this OPSO. We can't return it on a normal return. So now what do we do with it? What are some of the options we have? Because again, we never want to see anybody write off parts because that's a complete loss. But as we talked about before, the longer a part stays around, the more it costs you. And some people say, well, that part doesn't have a cost because we wrote it down to a penny. Wrong. It has a cost. You paid for that part. It has a cost because you touched that part. It has a cost because you moved that part. It takes up shelf space on your shelf. There is a cost to that part. Whether it's written down to a penny or not, there's still a cost associated with that part. So we'll talk today about how to get rid of that part and try and recoup as much money as we can. So Chris, I'll kick it off and send it over to you. What are some of the ways we can try and get rid of this OPSO?
Well, and that's one thing, Jeremy, I'm going to just talk about for a second before we delve into that. And that is just the why does it end up staying on our shelves? And I think, that emotion thing we love to talk about quite a bit comes into play, that people are afraid because they don't know what to do with it. Well, I might sell it one day, so you know what? I'd rather just keep it. And then it sits there forever. And then you have dust that starts to settle. And before you know it, 5 years have gone by and those parts are still on your shelf. So, with what we're going to talk about now, it's really important that you have a plan. And how do we get rid of it? And more importantly, don't fall into that trap where it sits, and I'll get to it later because life will intervene and always make it so you forget about it. And then a year later, it'll come up when you do inventory, and then you'll do the same thing. And it's just this vicious cycle over and over. So just really think about what you have and how to do it in that plan. So for me, the top things I want to do, and it's even before it gets to the point where it's considered obsolescence, 13 months or greater, I start to look at a part as it slows down aging wise around 8 months, 8 to 9 months. And by doing that, now I still technically, potentially have time to do something about it, as opposed to if I wait till that 12th or 13th month, most of my return eligibilities, if I'm with an OE, are gone.
Right.
So now I have harder decisions to make. It's much more difficult to get rid of or move out. So really, I want to look at it as that demand starts decreasing and slowing down. So what are those parts? Can I return them to the vendor at that point? Maybe do a 2-for-1 and buy something that moves much more and I have more demands for, to try to move that slower moving parts out. Or if I'm fortunate enough that I'm in a group of stores or dealerships that have more than one location, maybe another location or store has demands for some of those parts. So that, I think that's where we start. Just don't make it difficult on yourself. Control what is controllable before it becomes uncontrollable. That's where I would start. What about yourself?
Yeah. Well, it's funny you say that because a lot of times, you'll have that parts manager just kind of shrugs their shoulders and say, well, we can't return it. That's not acceptable. Get a hold of your representatives, whoever you represent as your OE, get a hold of your representatives and see if you can do that deal of, will you take it back at 80%, 70%, whatever it is. Will you take it back if we place a 2-for-1 offsetting order with good stock that we do sell? Yeah. Don't be afraid to ask those questions. Your OEs want to sell parts too, and they want to make sure that you have the right parts on their shelf. So a lot of times they'll make those one-off deals with you. But the other part of that is huge. And a lot of places that have multiple locations always seem to forget about that. Check your other locations. Check those before you make that deal with your OE to send them back, at a certain percentage. Because if you can transfer them at full cost, you're going to make full money on them. So that's where I start. I start with the transfers. If I can't transfer it to another location, the next thing I do personally, because again, I'm going to try and recoup as much money as I possibly can out of these parts. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have a list that I'm going to give to both my counter people, well, all three counter people, back counter people, my outside sales people if I have them. Here's a list of parts that I have that I'm trying to get rid of. I need you to sell these for me. Whether we put them up front on special, whether we know that sometimes the shop uses those parts and maybe we can move them, or outside people know that there's customers out there that sometimes buy that kind of stuff. Let's try and get rid of them and recoup as much money as possible before we start looking into those, resources that are going to potentially, in the grand scheme of things, you think that they're costing you money, but in reality, they're probably not. They're probably saving you money because eventually that part, when it gets to a certain age, it's going to have to go into a dumpster. If it gets to an age where it's rusted out or whether it's rotting because it's a hose or it's a belt, those parts will get to a point where they do not have any viable usage anymore, and it will cost you more at that time. But those are where I would start. After I get through with that, now it becomes more difficult. You know, if we've exhausted our salespeople, if we've exhausted trying to move them on specials, if we've exhausted trying to make a deal with whoever we have to make a deal with to return them, are we set up in our system? And most OEs are. And there's usually a stock locator associated with the OE where any other dealer in the country can see what we have in stock. Are we actively using that? And I know you were extremely successful using that. Hey, why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I will too, but before we get to that, I keep going back. I don't want to interrupt you because you're bringing really good, valid points. But the old adage, one man's trash is another man's treasure. When you do your transfers to your other locations, if that is applicable to you, please make sure that they are willing to accept it and don't just send it. You know, I say that,
Yeah,
but you're
yeah,
like,
we have to
Chris,
put that caveat out there.
this is obvious, right? It's not obvious because it's happened. That's why I wanted to bring that up. But also in that piece about giving your list to your OPS, your front and your back counter, more importantly, can you identify customers that that use those specific parts? And
Right.
maybe you can sell them to them too, or maybe those guys you make a little bit better deal on the parts because you can maintain a higher level of profitability by doing that. But you talked about the visibilities of having those parts in your inventory and other dealers in the OE or other locations in the OE can have visibility. And if they have usage, you hope that they search that first. And that helps you remove those because that helps you maintain that level of profitability, right? That's the name of the game. We want to get as much as we can out of this before we can't. But that has to be a cultural change if you're not doing it in your dealership or
Mhm.
location, that your people have to prioritize it because a lot of times they don't because they look at the profit on it and they're like, oh, it's going to hurt me. It's the wrong way to look at that. Yes, the margin is lower, but the flip side of that is if you don't take that out or that advantage of that opportunity, the end is zero.
Right.
And
That's
not
all
only
right.
that, it ties up your inventory, which we all know our inventory is cash.
Yeah.
So we might have $1 million in parts as value, but what percentage of that is really good working, moving inventory versus obsolescence? And that's where you really have to be careful. So I always had that adage, I'd rather get 15% of something than nothing of nothing when it comes to obsolescence. I want to put that qualifier out there. Not everything, but on those parts, if I could make that, then I know I'm doing well. But culturally, getting your people engaged in that, showing them the value of that, especially if it's a slow day and they're not paying attention to that, because those notifications typically come in as emails.
Right.
And if you get programmed not to look at them, because I'm not worried about that, it's just white noise in the background. So, really, culturally changing that, what we do with those, integrating those every day into what we do. Now, to be very specific with that, you will get those notifications for back ordered parts, fast moving parts that might be unavailable currently in the PDC. So you have to make decisions on that. You don't want to sell your entire good inventory out on that at a lower margin
Right.
if you know you're going to move them and now you're stuck. The data supports that what statement I just said. So, but yeah, that it's a great tool if you have that availability to help you with obsolescence and really just help manage that. It's not going to get rid of all of it, but it might get rid of some of it.
Right. Right. And then, once you get to that point where you've done everything you can to try and move that part, to try and make money with it, it gets to the point where we have to start looking at, okay, how much can I get for this part? Because right now, I'm not getting anything. So I'm losing either way. So if I could potentially send it to somebody, and there's a lot of warehouses throughout the country that buy obsolete inventory. Some of them are better than others. Some of them pay more than others. But that's another option we have. If it gets to that point where I'm not able to sell them, I'm not able to discount them, I'm not able to return them, hey, I have to try and figure out some way of recouping some money. So maybe I can send it to one of those warehouse buyers that buys it. And the other thing, and you always want to use this as a last resort because you're going to get the least amount of return for it. It's, can I sell it to a junkyard? A junkyard, a scrap yard, does it have some value there? That's the least amount of money you're probably going to get for it. But again, unfortunately, if you've waited this long and you've exhausted all your options, and that part is truly obsolete and non-returnable and non-usable, you've already lost that money anyway. So, you have to try and get what you can out of that part. But that's too a lot of the times where, especially parts managers, especially counter people, they kind of don't want to do those extra steps. Oh, it's obsolete inventory. I'm not going to worry about it. And like you said earlier, they just keep pushing it aside. And we can't do that. We have to have full focus on those parts because, again, our inventory is cash. And the whole purpose of having an inventory is to sell it. And when we sell, we want to make money. So if we buy $1 million worth of inventory, but we only sell 700,000, we're 300,000 in a hole to begin with. So we want to make sure that the inventory on our shelf is moving constantly, always moving in and out on a daily basis. We don't ever want to see those parts accumulating on our shelf. Think about your own cash money. When you take it to a bank and you invest that money, whatever it's in, whether it's a CD, a savings account, investing, you want that money to grow. You want it to make more money. You never want to go into an investment firm and say, hey, I want you to take all my money and just stick it on the shelf. That's it. Just stick it on the shelf. And I'm going to keep bringing you more money and I'm going to keep buying more parts and I'm just going to have you keep sticking it on the shelf. What good does it do you? We want to sell that inventory. And again, that's the whole hang up a lot of people have when they start talking about obsolescence. Like you said earlier, they get into that emotional state where they don't want to get rid of it because they feel like they're going to lose. You've already lost. cut your losses and move on.
100% agree. And just remember the goal of this and the goal of being an effective parts department is that we want to prevent as much as we can of the parts we have to actually getting to the stage where they are considered obsolete or obsolescence.
Right.
So when we remember, and we talked about this previously, I'm going to recap it now, 50% of all obsolete parts come from non-stock parts ending up on our shelves.
Okay.
So if we really focus on the front side of our business and preventing those non-stock watched parts, whatever you may call them with your DMS, from actually getting there, you've halfway won the battle right out of the gate. You
Right.
know, the easiest thing we can do is flip the switch and say, you know what, tomorrow, guys, we're going to wipe out all of our obsolescence. But if we do that and don't do anything on the front side to prevent it, it's going to come back in several months worse than it is currently now. It's that never ending perpetual cycle. So just remember that inventory's cash. If we can prevent those, just even that, the 50% of the non-stock parts from ending up in our inventory, look at what your obsolescence is currently, over 12, and whatever that dollar figure is, cut it in half. Would that make a difference in your dealership or location?
Right.
I think I know the answer to that, and you might too. It's yes.
Yeah.
So just when you look at it from that standpoint, it's not so overwhelming. Don't overthink this. Also,
Exactly.
don't also, as we're going through this today and we're laying out the steps that you can take, don't wait till you have this obsolescence before you're trying to figure out what to do with it. Sit down now and make the plan. What's step one? What's step two? What's step three? When we've worked with clients and customers, we've typically come up with about 8 to 10 things, depending on geographic location and what's in your area, to be able to remove obsolescence from our inventory. So have a plan. Don't be afraid to pivot and stick to it. But more importantly, make sure you have approval and you are not running rogue and just doing this on your own if you don't have the authority or approval to do this. Yet again, I have to say and preface this.
Yeah, because we've been there and done that, right? We've
Oh,
seen it
yeah.
happen. So
Yes. But, those are things I think, you brought up great points, right? Just really understand what options I have, get approval, make sure that ownership or your director or whatever your structure is of your dealership is, that you have a plan, everybody agrees to it, and you stick to it.
yeah, that's the whole thing. It is having a plan and being aware and being ready to handle these situations when they arise. Well, it looks like we're at our time limit again. So I tell you, these things go fast, don't they?
They do. I could go for another 5 hours.
So tune in next time. We're going to start diving in the service side of this a little bit. But as always, and Chris will put all the contact information up at the end of the video. Please reach out to us with any questions, comments, concerns. Let us know what you'd like us to talk about, what you'd like us to dive into. And our next episode, episode number 8, we'll start getting into some service stuff. That's all we have for now. So thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for watching. We appreciate it very much. Hit us with those questions. Like and subscribe. Thank you.